All right, let's get right into this one. So I want you to picture this. It's September 29th, 2006. You've got this brand new $25 million luxury jet, an Embraer Legacy 600, on its very first flight. It's soaring high above the Amazon rainforest, just this endless sea of green below. Inside, 7 people are heading home to the US. Everything is perfect. But in just a split second, that smooth ride turns into a desperate struggle for survival.
Out of absolutely nowhere, there's the loudest bang any of them had ever heard. A just violent jolt rocks the whole plane. A passenger, who happens to be a New York Times reporter named Joe Shai, peeks out his window and he sees something that's just impossible. The winglet, that little upturned tip of the wing, it's just gone, sheared right off. He said it looked like it had been, and this is a quote, chewed off. In that moment, they knew they were in very, very serious trouble.
And this is the core mystery of the whole thing. The little Legacy jet, even with that catastrophic damage, was somehow landed by its pilots on a remote airstrip. Every single one of the 7 people on board survived. But the other plane, a massive Boeing 737 Gulf Flight 1907 with 144 people on board, it just vanished, gone from the radar screens. So how on earth could that happen?
Well, as soon as the news broke, the hunt for answers kicked off. And in all that initial chaos and heartbreak, the public and the investigators, they quickly focused on what seemed like the most obvious target, the American pilots in that little luxury jet that somehow made it out of the sky alive.
The first story that really caught on was this idea of reckless flying. See, some early, and it turns out totally inaccurate radar data, seemed to show the Legacy jet flying all over the place, like it was climbing and descending wildly, and the press just ran with it. The narrative became, these American pilots were just joyriding, testing out their expensive new toy, and in the process they caused the deaths of 154 innocent people.
And you have to understand the public pressure here was just intense. This quote really says it all. There was this feeling of deep injustice in Brazil. You know, why did the little American plane get to survive while our big passenger jet just fell out of the sky? The pilots, Joseph Lepore and Jan Palladino, were actually detained. They weren't seen as heroes for landing a crippled plane. They were painted as the villains behind a national tragedy.
But then, everything changed. Investigators managed to recover the flight data recorders, the black boxes, from the wreckage of the 737 and from the Legacy jet that landed. And these things, they don't lie. They record every single input, every altitude change, every system parameter. And what they held was about to blow that whole initial reckless pilot theory completely out of the water.
The data from both black boxes revealed something absolutely shocking. At the exact moment of impact, both planes were flying at precisely the same altitude, 37,000 feet. They weren't flying erratically at all. No, they were on a perfectly straight, head-on collision course.
Now, to get why that's so unbelievably wrong, you have to understand a really basic rule of flying. Think of the sky as having invisible highways, right? There are rules of the road. On this particular route over the Amazon, planes flying north, like the Legacy jet was, are supposed to be at an even altitude, like 36,000 feet. Planes flying south, like the Gulf flight, are supposed to be at an odd altitude, like 37,000 feet. They should have had 1,000 feet of empty air between them. They should have never ever been at the same altitude.
So this brings us to what really happened. It wasn't one big mistake. Disasters like this are almost never caused by just one thing. Instead, what we have here is a classic example of what safety experts call the Swiss cheese model. The idea is you have multiple layers of safety. Think of them as slices of cheese. A disaster can only happen when, by some terrible stroke of luck, the holes in every single one of those slices line up perfectly. And you can literally watch the errors start to stack up. First hole, air traffic control never told the Legacy jet to descend to 36,000 feet like its flight plan said it should. Second hole, a controller then misread his screen, thinking the plane was at 36,000 when that was just the planned altitude. Third hole. Right after that, the Legacy pilots lose radio contact for 57 agonizing minutes. But it's those last 2 failures happening almost at the same time that sealed their fate.
That last hole in the cheese, it was a silent one, an invisible mistake in a small, boring-looking box in the cockpit that essentially turned the Legacy jet into a ghost. It made it completely invisible to that oncoming 737. And that box was the transponder.
Okay, so let's break this down real quick. These two systems, the transponder and TCAS, they're designed to be the ultimate safety net. The transponder basically shouts out, "Hey, I'm a plane, and I'm at this altitude." The TCAS in other planes is listening for those shouts.
If two planes get too close, the TCAS goes wild in both cockpits, yelling climb, climb, or descend, descend. But here's the fatal flaw. If one plane's transponder is off, the other plane's TCAS is totally blind. It has no idea there's anything there.
So how did the transponder get turned off? Well, the answer investigators came up with is just terrifyingly simple. They figured out that because of the cockpit design, it was actually possible for a pilot to just rest his foot in a certain way and accidentally hit the button that put the transponder on standby. And here's the craziest part. There was no alarm, no loud beep, no flashing light, just a small yellow light on a panel full of other lights. The pilots, flying a brand new plane they weren't totally familiar with, just never noticed. And just like that, their plane went dark.
Out of this unbelievable chain of errors in this awful loss of life, the aviation world learned some really crucial lessons. The point of the investigation wasn't just to point fingers. It was about digging into the systemic failures to make absolutely sure something like this could never, ever happen again. And the investigation led to real, concrete changes. Brazil completely overhauled its air traffic control system. The FAA put out an immediate warning to all pilots of that jet about the cockpit design. And critically, manufacturers are now required to put an audible alarm in if a transponder gets turned off. A simple fix that would have completely broken the chain of errors that day. It also just reinforced this vital idea of blameless investigations, where the goal is to get people to report small mistakes before they turn into catastrophes.
So in the end, that initial story of reckless American pilots, it was 100% wrong. This was a tragedy that was born from a massively complex system, where a whole series of tiny, silent, and frankly, kind of boring human and tech errors all lined up in the most improbable and devastating way you can imagine.
And that leaves us with a pretty chilling thought, doesn't it? The systems we all rely on every single day, from the planes we fly in to our power grids to the internet, they are all incredibly complex. And this story is just a stark reminder of their hidden fragility. It really makes you wonder, how many other little silent errors are just sitting out there, dormant, in the systems we trust with our lives?